Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Myron Belkine. I'm an adjunct professor at the George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs in the Graduate School of Political Management, a former international bureau chief for the Associated Press, and the 107th president of the National Press Club. The National Press Club is the world's leading organization, the world's leading professional organization for journalists committed to our profession's future through our programming with events such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at press.org. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker and those of you attending today's event. Our head table includes guests of our speaker, as well as working journalists who are club members. And so if you hear applause in our audience, I note that members of the general public are attending, and that's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPC Lunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answers period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guests. I'd ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is called. From your right, the audience's right, Anthony Shop, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Social Driver and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Nell Minow, movie critic for BeliefNet. Helen Fresenden, Washington correspondent for the Oregonian in Portland. Jennifer Schonberger, producer for Fox Business News and co-organizer of today's event. Jennifer Walters-Michalek, executive director of the M.Night Shyamalan Foundation. Jerry Zaremski, chairman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, a past NPC president, and the Washington bureau chief for the Buffalo News. Skipping over our guest for a moment, Andrea Stone, freelance journalist and the Speakers Committee member who organized today's event. Thank you so much, Andrea. Joanna Duffy, program coordinator of the M.Night Shyamalan Foundation. Jill Lawrence, columnist for Creators Syndicate and other news outlets. John Selak, president of the Selak Media Group and editor of the Selak Report. Tejender Singh, editor and White House correspondent for India America Today. M.Night Shyamalan has directed, written, and produced 10 major motion pictures, including one of the top-grossing films of all time, The Sixth Sense. The 1999 thriller starring Bruce Willis was nominated for 6 Academy Awards and grossed more than $2 billion worldwide. A master of the supernatural, Shyamalan is now working on a star-studded mystery series, Wayward Pines, which debuts on Fox this fall. He also has an independent feature film in the works called Sundowning. In Shyamalan's first film, the low-budget Praying with Anger, he played an American visiting India, the place of his birth. In real life, he's the son of 2 doctors and grew up in suburban Philadelphia. That's where he and his family still live and where most of his movies have been filmed and are set. It was in 2007, while visiting high schools in Philadelphia, scouting for locations for the movie The Happening, that Shyamalan first became interested in the issue of education. He wondered why 2 schools, just a few minutes' drive apart, were so different. One filled with eager, excited students and teachers, the other so scary and depressing that it seemed like a prison. That set off a 4-year quest for answers that culminated last fall in the book, I Got Schooled, the unlikely story of how a moonlighting movie maker learned the 5 keys to closing America's education gap. Hollywood filmmaker to education reformer, the transition is not as unusual as it may sound. Remember Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense? Many of Shyamalan's films are told from the point of view of a child. As he once told an interviewer, quote, I just always think of stories with little kids at the center because that time in my life was a big time. It represents a kind of innocence and belief and faith. These movies are all about learning to believe in something, unquote. Now, through the foundation he co-founded in 2001 with his wife, Bhavna, this self-described interested amateur in education is working to remove the barriers created by poverty and inequality. His efforts started in Philadelphia and now have shifted to advocating for educational reform throughout the United States. Considering that our guest made 45 amateur films with a Super 8 movie camera before he broke into the professional ranks, we will be interested to watch how his burgeoning off-screen passion develops. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming M.Night Shyamalan.
Thank you very much for having me. That was a gracious introduction there. I was listening to all that kid stuff. That was good. So yeah, it's just forgive me for a second because yesterday I was editing movies and this whole kind of jumping between two lives here. It's hard. Like I was at the end of the day in the editing room and we just had a screening and we were going through all the changes with the editor and they're like, "You got to go to Washington D.C. tomorrow to talk." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta." Then I went home and looked at all my notes and changed into another hat. So if I'm a little sluggish mentally, just forgive me for a second, trying to do different things. Let me just start by saying, celebrity activists they make my stomach cringe. So let's just start there. So you don't automatically get the right to have advice, give advice on something because you were successful at something else. That makes no sense at all. But you do have a spotlight on you sometimes, and I think that's how it gets blurred. In my case, it's something I'm really sensitive about. So it's not something I've always said, graciously no to being asked to be promoting this or that charity-wise. So this is very unusual for me, and in fact, came really organically. As was mentioned, this kind of began without me thinking about it, kind of. Just as a citizen, we went and I live in Philadelphia, and I needed something to be personal. Our foundation does a lot of amazing work around the world, and generally speaking, they'll come and say, "We're helping this community in Africa, we're helping this community in India," and I'll be interested, but it's I'm not the one getting activated, and they are, and my wife is. But on this particular subject, I got hit. And I spent the last 5 years on planes, on evenings and weekends, writing, researching, and working with a team to come to this book, which was really kind of an organic. And I think for me, anything good that's come in my life has come without an agenda. I had no idea where it was going. Just I wanted to learn. So really, I feel like on behalf of the single mom of the inner city child, that I wanted to be the one with the resources to get the information, to give them the information. That's really all it was really about at the end of the day, and still today. So what happened was, I went to this school in The Happening, where Mark Wahlberg was a principal in a school, and we saw these two schools, and it was in Philadelphia. One was this incredibly vibrant school, and then I got in the van to the location scout, went 4 minutes away, and went into another school. And this was the worst thing you could imagine, the usual metal detectors, the lights really dim, the kids were just, not in a good place. And to even show me the classrooms, the janitor had to unlock the classroom doors. There were bars on every classroom, literal bars. And the top floor of this school was shut down because there was too much drug and sex going on, so they just crammed the kids down onto 3 floors instead of 4. It's like animals, right? It was damage control, and the theater had been burnt down. Someone had set fire to it. This was my tour, and this was my city, and I was really, really upset. And I saw a kid when I went into. This is kind of symbolic. It's funny, but it was symbolic. I went into the first school. I walked into this school, this vibrant school, and as soon as I walked in, all the kids came rushing over. "Oh my God, are you making a movie? You're making a movie here? Can I be in it? Can I die in your movie?" And the teachers came out, and it was like the Pied Piper, and the possibility of a movie being made there was just right on the tip of their tongues, and they were ready, And in this other school, a kid came up, walked up to me, literally looked at me, kind of recognized me, and decided that's not possible, and kept walking. And very symbolic, right? Because those kids, anything is possible. No warning, filmmaker walks in, yeah, they're gonna make a movie in our school. That's about everything, I wanna be in it, you know? The other kid, I'm standing in front of him, and it's not there. It's just not there. And it's very symbolic of what's been done to these kids. So very, very organically, I said, all right, I just wanna know the answers to this. Very simple, let's go, you know, in the typical foundation way, let's go to the place in the United States where they have inner city education correct for low-income kids. They go out, they look, there is none. Fascinating piece of information for me. So then I said, let me just ask questions. So the beauty of the one good thing about being, you know, known a little bit is you can call people. You can say, hey, Senator, can I talk to you? Hey, you're the head of this in California or in, you know, Colorado, wherever. Can I fly to you and will you have dinner with me and can I ask you questions? So we started doing that. I just said, hey, I came here and went everywhere. You know, I met with everybody at the time who was in the top places in education. What works? I said, what works? And they would give me their list, A, C, G, you know, X, Y. And then I go to the next person, hey, what works in education? And they'd go A, you know, L, M, C, and I go, wait. And then I kept doing it, and every list was different. Now, I come from a family of doctors. So when we say, hey, is smoking bad for you? Everyone says the same thing. It's an evidence-based field. So this was very confusing for me. And I said, I'm completely confused, you know, about what I'm getting, the information I'm getting. Again, I'm just the mom, the single mom. I just want the information. And at this point, you could normally give up, and then you'd start to go on opinion. Didn't want to do that. So I said, let's gather the information. Oh, I missed one little important moment that happened. I gathered a lot of important people from Philly, like the top people, the CEOs and the real activists, and we had a little get-together like this. And I said, I want to learn about education. I want you to tell me I want to be the poster child. And it was so heated, like it immediately became this incredibly heated thing. And this was my first of a million tastes of how heated this subject is for everybody, you know, immediately. And like the charter school people were like, you know, livid in their faces with this, and the unions are in the pockets of the politicians, and then over here, and everybody was like trying to stay calm, and I was just asking, you know, I was like, oh my goodness. And like people were like wives were grabbing their husband's arms and saying, calm down, you know, it was like that. And I was like, wow, this is, so I began asking the same question. So someone would say, like, for example, charter school. So I said, so the lady was like going, you know, they were gung-ho about charter schools. And I said, so charter schools, that's the answer? And they go, yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm your poster child. Send me the data. Being the Indian that I am. Send me the data. And they said, we'll send it to you. And I said, next morning, got to my office, and it was a brochure for a charter school. And I was like, that's not what I asked you to send. I said, send me the data that says charter schools outperform district schools, and I'm your poster child. So that became the pattern of blurry information, half knowledge, insinuations, anecdotal movements, all that stuff, which is very blurry. So I said, all right, we found our purpose as a foundation. Our job is to gather all the data, and we're going to put it on one table so everyone's clear, and they go to the doctor's office and they say, this is what you do to stay healthy. We're going to do that, okay? So we spent 2 years. We got researchers, and we gathered all the information, and it was a really difficult process to have standards of what was the study that counted, that kind of thing. And we didn't want one study, because you could cherry pick anything you want. We wanted a meta study of everything. So we gathered everything 2 years later of meeting and them talking me through because I'm a novice. So you have to say, I don't understand that. I don't understand what you're saying. So tell it to me so I understand it, so I can tell it to a parent. And they would show me each thing, and I would say, great, that says that says this, that says that. 2 years later, we looked at it, and we had basically a pretty comprehensive look at, not everything, but you know, thousands of studies on the table. And guess what? It was a big blurry pile. You could cherry pick anything you wanted. You know, and whatever your confirmation bias was, you can find confirmation for that. So there I was now basically at the same position as the people that I had called and said, the experts, can I talk to you, right? And what do you know? I could have come up with my own list at that point, A, G, L, X, right? Based on my own feelings. Again, no, I didn't want to be one more opinion in this mix, no opinions. So it looked like it was over there, right? It was just stalled for a second. You know, what did we glean from all this is that It's blurry. That's what we gleaned. So it came to this one big moment, which was we went out to dinner with our friends who are doctors, brilliant doctors, and we weren't talking about education at all. And my friend was the head of the residents at University of Penn Hospital. And he was just saying how he teaches. I love listening to him. He's very just impressive guy. He's the guy you go to for advice. He's the rock. And I said to him, tell me what you tell, how do you teach these residents, these hotshot residents? These are like the top people in the whole world. These are the guys. How do you teach these hotshots? And he goes, I tell them the first day, I said, forget what you know. I said, and this is what he's saying, this is the data. You should tell your patients, if they do these 5 things, sleep 8 hours a day, eat a balanced diet, exercise regularly, pay attention to your mental health, and don't smoke, the chances of getting all diseases drops to an incredibly low level. Beats every pill ever invented. Your body is naturally healthy. But if you don't do one of them, it buoys back to the norm. And for whatever reason, it was like the House moment in House, where he figures out the case. It was that moment, and I literally stopped eating the gnocchi, and I was like, that's it. It's a system. You're gonna get a lot of false negatives. Is there a group of things, when done together, always work to close the education gap? By the way, that's what we're talking about here, the education gap. Now, the education gap is just for those of you not clear on it, what we're talking about is the gap that exists between inner city, low-income children and their white suburban counterparts. The reason I phrase it like that is because 98% of this group is African American. So that gap, which has existed and exists in almost every state except for Hawaii, and we'll get into why, has been there and continues to be there and isn't getting smaller and has always been there. Is there evidence that a group of things can close this gap? So we went back and I said, this is how we're gonna look at the data. Find me combinations of things. When you did this with this, was it always positive? Did we get a false negative? We were rigorous about this kind of, if there was a negative reaction, then it's not what we're saying here. 2 more years it took to do this. That's how, because what you find, what's hard is about erasing your thinking. That's what's so hard, trying to categorize. That's really what it is, how to think about something. You drop dead on the treadmill, so that means exercising is bad for you? No, you were smoking, and then you dropped dead on the treadmill, right? The treadmill wasn't the thing that, you have to recategorize that, and you get false things that blur you. Like, my grandmother smoked she was 105, and she smoked every day of her life. Smoking's good for you, Those kind of confusing things. You got to categorize everything. What's anomaly? What's that? And it took 2 years. And lo and behold, the pile became organized into 5 groups. And we stared at it, and we're like, wow, this is consistent. This is consistent. For the first time, I'm absolutely clear. And then I said, let's now check our answers. So we said, let's go to every school in the United States and check and see what they're doing. That is closing the gap. And we prayed they were doing these 5 things. And lo and behold, they were all doing these 5 things. They all came to it separately, the answer separately. By trial and error, burning through fires, their own learning process. And those amazing individuals that can figure it out intuitively, they figured it out. And that's where we are. And we put together a book, and I'm going to tell you what the 5 are. It's a fascinating thing. They're in no particular order. But the first is what leadership looks like in these schools. So in the schools that are closing the education gap, the leaders are the principals. They look like this. The leadership is bifurcated. The principals spend 80% of their time teaching teachers. Now, that seems intuitive, but here's the reality. The the principals in normal schools, normal inner city schools, teach teachers 8% of the time. So it's like a coach who's not coaching their players. It's a coach that's outside selling tickets and letting the players run around on the court. In these schools, they're doing only teacher instruction, basically. And all the other duties are separated out to an operations manager or whatever you want to call it, another group that's handling facilities, paperwork, discipline, janitorial, you name it. That's someone else's business. The coach coaches the teachers. That's what it looks like. Nobody succeeds in isolation. You don't want to have the one teacher that's great, and that's the end of it. The other thing that leadership looks like in these schools, this is still under that first tier, is they have an incredibly loud and consistent culture. That's what you find in all these schools. Now, this is amazingly critical. Now, when I remember on the verse table, that one that I was telling you about where they're all so heated, they were like, school spirit, right? And I was like, I wrote it down on my list dutifully. Now, what it ends up happening, it isn't the school spirit, it's a messaging that's happening. Here's the thing. This is related to the underlying issue. What are we talking about? My opinion, this is opinion, by the way. This is the first thing as opinion that I'm saying to you, is that this is about racism, okay? Our country was built on a sin, fact. It was condoned until the 60s officially, fact. We're imagining it disappeared, that influence has disappeared. I will show you each and everything in the data that will say to you, it's the reverse of what we thought. The problem doesn't exist in these schools. It exists outside their schools. What happens to them outside the schools, that's what the data says. It isn't in the schools. When we always think about this issue, we're always like, now what's wrong with our inner city schools? Nothing. That's what the data says. That's not me, that's what the data says. The cultures in these schools are incredibly loud and incredibly consistent. And the reason is, and one of the heads of Uncommon Schools was telling me, they're getting a message told to them outside of our school, and we're going to shout one louder. And it's really a messaging thing that they're teaching these kids, and everyone has to buy in on it in these schools. It isn't you get to do something positive and you get to do a different thing positive. It doesn't work like that. Everyone buys into the leader's thing. It's always an empowering message. It's never the same in these schools, but it's uber consistent from the secretary to the IT person to obviously every teacher, and everyone involved believes and gives off this messaging 100% consistent and clear from beginning to end, the second they walk in to the second they walk out, to the point that some of these schools have their own code, right? It's about, they have to feel like they own it. So in Achievement First schools in Brooklyn and all, they don't clap when somebody does well. They do this. It's shining. It's called shining. You give a really good answer in third grade, guess what? When they go to fourth grade, Mr. Jenkins in fourth doesn't have a different system. He doesn't have a different code that they have to master, which teaches them they're not empowered. That's what the message is out there. This is consistent. You can make your choice to do your homework, do this, do whatever you want. You can be empowered. Nothing's going to change on our clock. You are empowered, you know? And slowly they start to realize, hey, I studied, I did this, I got the 37 turned into a 57. Huh, I wonder how much more I can, and literally you start to feel empowered like that. Whole school. This is the thing. It's not a classroom. It's a school. That's what's going to win the day. So that's what this looks like. It's literally, you cannot do it without doing it this way. You cannot do it. That's what the one tier looks like. The other thing is about realizing the importance of teachers. And this one I'm going to be sensitive about because this is the one that gets abused and gets everyone confused. We all know how important teachers are, but they are critically important. A teacher in the 80th percentile, like one of the best teachers, and by that we'll say in the correlation of achievement, student surveys, and observation, if those three things correlate, right, it's the best we got right now to evaluate teachers. If it puts you in the 80th percentile, you're that good, you can close the gap by yourself 4 years, if you get that kid for 4 years. That's how good you are. You can overcome everything that society is doing, everything that's behind in 4 years. That's how powerful a teacher is. Now, at the very bottom of that group, if you get one of those, the lowest ranking teachers in that group, 3 good teachers in a row can't make up for 1 year of that one. That's how much you slide, how much hit you took from that. So what you find in these schools is the very, very lowest number of teachers, the ones at the very, very bottom, are not there. They're allowed to take them out. And their goals, as are our goals, is that the majority of all teachers should be able to work in this system. That's what this is about. This isn't about just getting Superman, Michael Jordans. Let's find all the Michael Jordans and turn the country around. That's impossible. That's ridiculous. It's got to be, if I am a 20th percentile teacher, you are going to observe me, you're going to give me the curriculum, you're going to do all these things that will make me get to even. You're going to get, when my kids are with me, they're going to get 1 year of education. And all the rest are going to close the gap. You know, the year and a half, 2 years, and closing the gap. So in these schools, you find that they have that ability to let go of the bottom tier. By the way, in these schools, it isn't really a pejorative kind of animosity kind of thing, because it's almost mutual at that point, because with the rigors of what I'm saying, on both sides, they're usually like, this isn't for me. You know, they come to that decision. What you find out when you look at it, by the way, is that these inner city schools, these inner city low-income schools, which, by the way, represent 18% of the country's schools, 58% of city schools, but overall in the country, 18%. This is only applying to 18% of the schools. In those schools, you need to be trained like a Navy SEAL. That's the reality. You can be in the Navy, fantastic, and you can help all of us, and it's an amazing thing. You just can't be in one of those schools. That's the reality. You're going to have to be trained in a specific way with specific expectations, and you're going to have to put in more time, everything. Navy SEAL, right? Those kids need a different kind of system, a different kind of approach. That's the fact. And if you're one of those few that wants to be in the Navy but not in the Navy SEALs, God bless you. There's a lot of other schools that you can go to. So that's the second tier. The third one is data. And what we think of as data up to this point is, little Johnny did this in his 3rd grade year at the end of the year. That's not data. That's too late. What you find in these schools is it's an incredibly intense atmosphere of best practices in every form you can think of. Curriculum, teaching best practices. Mrs. Smith over there taught 2nd grade this way with this book. Goes on a cloud, everybody gets it, they all talk about it, and then everyone now in 2nd grade is doing it that way. Best practices, best practice. Again, imagine I'm the 20th percentile teacher. What Mrs. Smith, who's an amazing teacher, did, now I can adopt as a behavior. What you find in these schools is, it's almost the reverse, because I'll tell you what my bias was going in here. I was an artist, right? I'm an artist, and I'm like, there's no way you're telling me how to make a movie. Just let us all be free, you know? Like, this is how, you can't tell me and Quentin how to make a movie. That's crazy. And yet, that's not what this is. This is like a system, like I said, like, knowledge that's been built up over time from amazing, amazing people, and we can build on it. We don't each have to invent how to teach these kids. They can, you can learn from everybody else. In these schools, it's incredibly prescriptive. It's to the point, it's almost like a military school. Those are the facts, the consistency of it. Best practices flourish both in curriculum, how to teach. Obviously, I'm telling you, the principal's in and out of these classrooms. You should see how all the doors are open in all these classrooms. The principal comes in and out of the classrooms and, hey, Mr. Johnson, you didn't acknowledge Betty over there. Later they talks with Mr. Johnson, you should speak a little louder, be a little quicker, move back to the front, make sure you get the kids in the back. Don't let them check out on us. Constantly, best practices, best practices. And here's the really interesting about data, which is true of everything that you find in this. It's a critical mass. So it's like this. If you get data on your class, little Johnny is doing this well in this, you need to focus on this. He's having trouble with this in math or whatever it is. And they're getting it 11 times per year versus 16 times per year. There's this incredible kick up in student achievement from 11 to 16. So if you gave up at 10, just like dropping dead on the treadmill, seems like a false, right? A false negative. You have to know this information, right? You need to know this for principals and everything. They need as much data all the time, constantly reinforcing where the kids are, how to keep them on track for someone like me that's not intuitive at this, right? You telling me, Johnny, where am I? Oh, okay, he needs to focus on this. All right, I'll help him, And they're getting the data constantly. It's just you should see this. Everyone has to be trained how to read the data, how to give the data, how to use the data, and it's non-negotiable. Mrs. Jenkins, who's a great teacher intuitively, can't opt out. That's not Navy SEAL training. You're trained as a Navy SEAL. You have a code of conduct in extreme situations about how to do this. So that's the third tier, the data. The fourth tier is more time. Here's the amazing thing. Now, here's the thing I was telling you about. It isn't in the schools. Here's the thing. In the summers, when little Johnny here in the inner city school, let's pretend he's exactly the same as Xavier, the white kid, and I'm just making up names, sorry, in the white suburban school. They're equal in the 2nd grade, right, when they graduate in June, equal. They come back in September, right? The inner city child is 3 months behind. 3 months behind from what they were in June. Xavier over here is 1 month ahead. They're 4 months apart. Not in school. From life, from the messaging they're getting, from the stimulation, from the questions. Why is the sky blue? What is that? No. All those little things, we don't realize it, but we're constantly teaching our kids all the time. We're teaching them something. This group is getting atrophied, and this group is getting stimulated. Here's the amazing thing. The gap is 2/3 of the entire gap that exists from grammar school all the way through high school happens in the summer. So those are facts. So you can't close the gap without getting into the summer a little bit, without closing that time. You want them in school as much as you can with different messaging. That means in every direction. So when you look at this more time in the book, it's early education, slam dunk. Good early education is slam dunk. Gets them to the starting gate at the right level. Now, it dissipates if that's all you did. After 3 years, it dissipates once they get back in, because I just showed you in the summers, they're going to start the attrition starts. Longer days, 1 hour extra a day, hour and a half extra a day. An hour a day extra is like 48 days of school. It's massive, right? And then they go into the summer a little bit. They have a longer school year, 8 days, 9 days, 10 days. And that's enough to help them close the gap. It stops it from sliding like that. They can stay equal with Xavier over here. Now, just as a little side thing, we support a guy, a Harvard kid in Philadelphia who does a summer program. He has kids for 5 weeks, intensely trains them in reading and with curriculum that he came up with, and he works with the parents, and they just intensely work. In those 5 weeks, he gets a 3.2 month reading gain. So I think you're reading this correctly when I tell you they are 6 months ahead of their peers that did not go to his 5-week training. One half a year. And get this is the best part. They're 2 months ahead of Xavier. It's an amazing thing. This isn't about ability, as we all know. I hope we all know that. This is about, knowledge, teaching them, getting them out of that messaging and all that stuff. So more time. You cannot win. You cannot win without that. Can't win. You might as well not do anything. If you do anything, again, you look at the data, you're just not going to lose. 2/3 of whatever you gain is going away. And the last thing, which is a fascinating one, is small schools. And the reason small schools is there, look, small schools by itself does one thing, it raises graduation rates by 17%. Has no effect on achievement. Done everything I just mentioned, the intensity of what we're talking about, the culture, the data, the teaching the teachers, can only be done in a small school. It can't be enough. If a principal is responsible for 400 kids versus 800 kids, it's just going to get dissipated. You can't do it. The schools that are closing the gap, they do it in this. When I say small schools, 550 or less. So that's what it looks like. It looks like that picture of the 5, and they're all doing these 5 things. It's a fascinating thing. This messaging, it's a fascinating thing. I was speaking on it was an NBC thing on education in New York. And I was just by chance on a panel, me and another author, and she wrote a book on what is it called, the Dunbar? Was it the Dunbar School? The Dunbar School, which is here, I think, right? Was here? And back in the day, all the amazing African-American intellectuals that couldn't get jobs they taught. They went into this school and they taught in this one school. And they put their arms around these kids and they said, we know out there you're getting this message. And so they came up with a system of how to teach these kids. And these kids ended up becoming first judges, the first lawyers, the first everything in this country, these African-American kids. They put their arms and they came up with a series of things. It's the same group back then. Because back then, it was open when those kids walked out that they were getting this messaging. Right now, we're pretending like that messaging doesn't exist at all. They're 100% getting this messaging. Even the inner city kids, my kids go to an all-girls school in Philadelphia, which I consider one of the best schools, if not the best school in Philly. And the inner city kids that go there, the inner city girls, they code switch when they go home. Their vocabulary shoots down. They pretend they're not interested in certain things, and they lean and do to survive, because you can't exist in that environment. There's a messaging that's coming. So this is it's a fascinating thing. It's very hopeful, by the way, because the data actually made sense. So thank you very much. I'd love to hear tons of questions from you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, please stay here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shyamalan, it'll be a year this fall since your book first came out. How is it helping to change the education landscape for minorities?
You know, it's amazing, the answer to this question, because we cannot handle the amount of opportunities that have come from the book. We've had states and cities and everything saying, we want to use what you laid out in the book. Help us write legislation, help talk to our Congress, talk to this, talk to that. It's been an incredible thing, so much so that I guess just to be honest, partly I thought I'd write the book and go back to making films. And I was like, no, you guys now take the data and go do that stuff, And I'm finding myself in the middle of all these conversations, both here in DC and in all the different states and cities. Obviously, Philadelphia as well. We're having a big conversation in Philadelphia of how to isolate in legislation these schools, these 18%. By the way, probably someone's going to ask this. There are 7% of the United States schools that are low-income suburban schools. Does this apply to those 7%? This is my guess, yes. The data is not related to that. The data, so I can't say you categorically yes. My guess is yes, that if you did this for that 7%, you'd get the same type of results. But this is about inner city, the inner city low-income kids. So amazing amount of opportunities. I'm a little daunted by it, to be honest. But we kind of have put together, at least in Philly, a think tank of everyone to say this is what legislation would look like. How do we implement this on scale? Obviously, the number one thing. The first thing that becomes the big question is, let's say Philadelphia, for example. The number of schools that this applies to is, what, 118. I need 118 principals that are Navy SEAL trained. So that's the problem. The first question to be answered, as soon as I can get 118, the pyramid, all that other stuff, I think we can get extended day. I think we can get all these things in Philly. We can do all that stuff. I need the 118 Navy SEAL trained principals to train the Navy SEAL teachers in those schools.
Have you encountered resistance to your ideas? And if so, what kind and from whom?
I was certainly braced for the barrage of resistance. And if my wife were here, she would tell you I'm completely naive about all these things, and I see things, glass 3/4 full when it's half full, and we haven't really had it, to be honest, because here's what the data says: both sides are right and wrong. That's what it says. So I can say to you, it's weird how the room broke up. I said, is this it must be a United States thing where we go, all right, pick side. There's two sides. Pick your side, kind of thing. And we walk in and go, oh, you're either with the unions or the pro education reform group. I'm like, I'm with neither. I just want to tell you what the data says. And the data says everyone has been completely unfair to giving responsibility to the teachers and principals in those schools. You haven't trained them, and you're holding them responsible. This is what the data says. Accountability alone does zero. This is not about motivation. That's what's so insulting. I mean, I almost cursed here. My God. So it's like, it upsets me. Oh, they're just not motivated. Let's pay them more. They'll get motivated. Zero. Let's hold them responsible or we'll penalize them. Zero effect on student achievement. It has to be, you have to give them knowledge. You have to train them before you hold them responsible. So in terms of, why did they circle the wagons over here? They're being unfairly held accountable. They want to do this. They haven't been trained to do it. No one's even said to them, by the way, you have to teach differently in these schools. No one's even said that. That teacher that's failing in this school and the teacher that's succeeding in the white suburban schools, switch them. They will fail over here and succeed over here. The great teacher over here will fail unless they do the Navy SEAL stuff we're talking about here. So it's a fascinating thing.
What do you think about the controversy over Common Core? What does it say about attitudes toward local control and resistance to uniform standards, and about our ability to improve our education system on a national scale?
Yeah, again, this side that's very upset about being blamed can read into everything that it's pejorative. Every move that's being made is pejorative, and I kind of read it that way as well a little bit. This one's blurrier, right? It's just setting standards, and as I told you, prescription is critical in these schools, you know? I mean, you know, curriculum, for example, like early childhood curriculum has enormous effect on kids. It's just a fact. It's off the charts. Like if you teach a kid a particular book versus another book in early childhood, by the time they get to kindergarten, first grade, it's enormous the difference that the correct curriculum can have. And proven curriculum throughout is definitively, data says it works. So on that front, it's correct spirit to raise the standard with data-driven curriculum. The messaging that's coming from that is, because you suck, we're going to show you how to teach. That's the messaging that I'm getting, and has never shifted. And so you're doing something kind of correct, but you're doing it in a kind of spitting at them kind of way. And it hasn't really changed. You know, almost everything is about how do we motivate these teachers and principals, which that's not what the data says.
You talk about eliminating the worst teachers and keeping kids in school for longer as pillars of your strategy. In South Korea, teachers are paid based on demand for their skill. It's essentially a free market for teaching talent, and the students there are routinely ranked among the top in the world. Should the United States take a page out of South Korea's playbook?
No. Okay. You can't use any data outside the United States and consider it valid. Finland, for example, was not built on slavery, has no racial inequality. The highest economic tier and the lowest economic tier are 5.6 times difference. Very small difference. Ours is 16, 17 times, right? Ours has a problem of messaging. Our issue, as I'm saying what the data says, is we're telling these kids they're worthless, that they have no value into this country. That's what's being told. This isn't about just education, it's about messaging. So these things that we're talking about is correcting a sin that our particular country has. There's probably a similar one in England. There's probably a similar place like that. It's not in Finland. And I'm not, using the data of what best practices are from other countries is dangerous, because it's not correct for it's not acknowledging our responsibility, that what we as this room are telling our children in the inner city. I hope I answered that question correctly.
Thank you. A California judge ruled Monday that teacher tenure violates students' rights to a good education. What do you think? Does it?
Again, what is the messaging we're sending to the country and to the teachers, right? Tenure, to some extent, is a little bit backwards based on what the data says. The data says you cannot tell whether a teacher is good or bad for the first 3 years. So if you're getting tenure in after the second year, just when I can tell you you're terrible, you're in for life, right? So it's reversed. You should be tenured for 3 years. You cannot, what's our guy, Jeffrey Canada, was a terrible teacher his first year. Should he have been fired? Everyone is bad. It's an art form. It's like you have to, that's what the data says. You can't tell. You cannot tell. It takes 3 years. They get it, they find it, they start to connect with their kids, they find that inner thing. It's an art form. It's a fascinating thing. Now, after that tenure, ironically, I know this is going to sound strange, data says it's not all that important. We want most of the teachers to be there working anyway, you know? It's the extremely terrible teachers at that point could be weeded out after 3 years. And then the rest of them, they all have to stay anyway. We need them all. So this is not actually a vital, important issue. It's so strange. But again, as you can see, even the word, did you say violate? Did you say violate? Did they said that? They violated?
Mm-hmm. And the political, wait, sorry, that's not the one.
Was it this one?
Yeah.
Yes, tenure violates. Come on, that's, you know, if that doesn't say it's your fault, I don't know what else does. Again, this is if we could say to the, you know, what in the perfect world, right now all the rules are set to contain bad behavior. That's what all the rules that are set in place, as opposed to the flourishing of best practices. So let's say Mrs. So-and-so is an amazing teacher. She should be able, she's first one up to get to assistant principal. Her best practices, everything should be flourishing. That actually has been proven to cause retention and school achievement to go way up. That's in there. It isn't actually the things we think it is. Why do we think that they're motivated by pay more than us? As it turned out, teachers are most, unselfish people that are out there working. It isn't, you raise their pay after a certain minimum, after a certain necessity. That isn't the motivating factor. It's success, being heard, all of the things that would motivate us. That's what it says. But yeah, this conversation about tenure is confusing to me, because that's not what the data says we should be talking about. Teach them how to be Navy SEALs, and then hold them accountable. And then give them whatever you want, tenure and things like that.
What could we do to get parents more involved in their children's education?
Okay, so as we kind of implicated here, or we talked about lightly, the messaging outside the school is not great, right? It's critical. So we know all the studies, or if you've looked at the studies of those homes, inner city low-income homes, are speaking millions of words less per year than high-income homes. All of that stuff. We know all that. There are no books on the shelves. There's no messaging in the correct way. All of that stuff. In the data that I had for the book, I didn't have enough data to reach to say that changing the home environment categorically will help us close the achievement gap. I can tell you from being in the trenches and talking and seeing enough data so far to tell you, I guarantee you that will be the sixth one. You know how bad I wanted to call this something with six, but I just couldn't get it. And it's there, it's about to be proven. I'll give you a for example. There was a ABC Darien project done in North Carolina in the early 70s with early childhood education. And they did quality childhood education, which I've told you, when it's done really well, inoculates the child for 3 years. And that's it, right? But in this one, they went into the home every 2 weeks and they taught the parents how to do homework with the kids. That's all they did. Just teach them like 1 hour every 2 weeks. Those kids, when tracked all the way through high school, were graduating at much higher rates, going to college at much higher rates, succeeding at much higher, lower, much less dropout rates, everything you can imagine. The home environment had changed. It had been changed. The possibilities had been changed. That's how powerful. They were inoculated for the rest of their lives by changing. That's how powerful it is. And I have those pieces of data. I just don't have enough to say it. And I know within the next 5 years, there'll be enough data to say, we did this and this, just like I told you, you have to do them together, and we had an exponential hit. So only good can come from involving them. Can I mandate it for these schools? No. This goes under the premise of, if the home environment does not change, can you close the achievement gap? So the answer to that is categorically yes.
Hollywood has a major influence over young Americans and how they view the world. Do television and films send messages that make students devalue education? And if so, how can Hollywood use its influence in a positive way? I haven't really thought about this answer here. I guess there are two separate parts of my brain, movie making and education. We're doing, I guess, in general, we're giving the same messaging as everybody else. How many African-American intellectuals do we see in our movies without it being, we always have Morgan Freeman as the president, I'll give you that. But beyond that, in the sci-fi movies, Morgan Freeman is the president, but what's the normal thing when what's the messaging? And I'm guilty of it, everyone's guilty of it. We're playing on social norms of, this is what we expect from this group, and this is what we expect from this group. The messaging is a societal thing, and we're complicit in it for sure. I don't know how much we can change it unless society changes as a whole. It's a difficult question. Sorry, I didn't answer that one well. Well, a brief related or a follow-up. As you know, film has the power to reflect and influence society. We now see increasing violence in films. Where will it end? Will movie fans reject this, or will we likely have to see the code reintroduced?
Yeah, it's a funny thing when we do again, I'm not an expert on violence in films, and they're, literally just education gap. That's all I've done for 5 years. But I'll tell you a funny thing. When we go get our films rated around the country, the United States is super prudish about sex. So like, oh my God, you showed a breast. Yeah, that's R. Like that kind of thing. Whereas the rest of the world, sexuality is not a thing, but violence is a thing. But here, you can kill any amount of people. It's PG. Yeah, bring the kids. Not a problem. Decapitation, not a problem. And it's a fascinating cultural thing where we're so desensitized to violence and obviously even glorify it, to some extent, it's tough, that kind of thing. But it's an interesting thing culturally because it is different in other countries. When I go to get ready, they'll have problems with the violence in my movies, and that's what they have issues with, So it's an interesting societal thing.
And now some questions about your filmmaking career. How did your work with cinematographer Tak Fujimoto on The Sixth Sense and later on Signs affect the general tonality and visual style of your films?
Wow, a little left turn there. I'm a big fan of Japanese cinema and Japanese art in general, the minimalism of it. And so Tak and I really got along. Tak shot Silence of the Lambs, so that's like one of my favorite movies. So I was like, please do my movie, please do my movie. But he does, ironically, American Gothic really well. Beautiful dark, but the minimalism, we're both minimalists, and generally my cinematographers I pick are more naturalists, they don't do too much, make it feel like a normal room, not blue lights with fans and things like that. So, I learned a lot from him, and he's done 3 of my movies, I think. So yeah, it's more about the Japanese cinema of it being, subtle colors. Even if you come to our house, it's very light, everything's very minimal, not too much furniture, that kind of thing. My brain gets a little messed up with too much stimuli.
As a writer, at what point, if at any time, do you collaborate? And is it usually a gut feeling when you conceive a new idea?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. I've tried something different here. I'm doing an independent film, and not trying to be, in any way assign a pejorative quality to any type of filmmaking. For me, I'm so easily influenced by, hey, can you do this? Or wouldn't you try to do this? And with this movie, basically I tried to do it in a way to get back to my gut, to understanding who I am and hearing my own voice a bit. And it was scary and fascinating, and maybe not unrelated to education, because what we're teaching these kids is to listen to their voice and feel empowered. And artists, I guess, when they're in their best form, are listening to themselves. So for example, I did things technically that are difficult. So I didn't have playback on when I was shooting the movie. So when I shot the scene, I didn't get to go look it and see if I did it well. That's normal now. I mean, everybody does it. I didn't do that. I would go, we need to do this again. Just listen. We need to do this again. And cinematographer says, no, we got it. We need to do this again. And out of my mouth comes the thing I didn't know. On that line, you need to come forward. Or this isn't about her anger. This is about her forgiveness, whatever it is. And just quietly, in that vein. And even so, with the script, I was very quiet with it. I held on to it and really go, something's wrong. Something's wrong. What's wrong? Don't go, hey, what's wrong? Even if she gives me the correct answer, I lost, right? And I need to go, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And oftentimes, just like the body, right? Your knee hurts. It's not your knee. It's your hip, right? But as an expert in this field, as a doctor would know, go, it's not your knee. It's your hip, to go, that scene's not working. It's not that scene, it's this scene. And to intuitively get to that place where you're going. And then the final thing was when you have to make a decision that won't get everybody. And to have peace about that for a second and go, I'm sorry, it feels correct. The colors feel correct this way. I have to do that. I'm gonna let go of this group. To have the courage to do that and to know why you're doing that. Not being rebellious, but being, this is truth. So hopefully when you see the movie, you might sense a kind of a clarity of voice. Don't have to like it, but you'll sense a clarity that wasn't done by committee, that kind of thing.
We're almost out of time, but before asking the last question, we have a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming events and speakers. On June 27th, Congressman John Dingell of Michigan will discuss When Congress Worked. July 22nd, Dr. Thomas Frieden, Director of the Centers for Disease Control, will address concerns about the MERS virus and other key health issues. And on August 1st, the President of the Republic of Congo, Denis Sassou Nguesso, will discuss peace, security, and stability of the Central African region and oil investments in his country. Next, I'd like to present our guests with the traditional National Press Club mug.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you use it for good coffee or good chai, but we hope you will remember your visit with us today. And finally, for the last question, what is your favorite movie of all time and why?
God. The tough question at the end. Gosh. I mean, there's probably in each genre, a movie. Probably, if I'm taking everything into account, I think The Godfather, the first Godfather, is the best film ever made on every level. Should I tell you why?
Sure.
You asked
Yeah,
why,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Sorry.
In journalism, we teach who, what, where, when, and why.
There you go.
So
The why is it's like a perfect balance between what seems normally for an artist, the burden of entertainment, the burden of keeping you activated, but it came organically from the conflicts in the piece and the incredible artistry that was involved that Francis Ford Coppola did. I mean, originally Francis was hired because he was just Italian. And he didn't, and what I find often is like auteurs that are forced a little bit to speak in a little bit more, I don't want to say commercial because that's pejorative, but into a vein that's a little bit more for everybody, end up not letting go of their voice. They do it very specifically, and they thought Francis was crazy, they thought, the way he was doing this, with giving it such drama and treating this subject with such clarity, and everyone followed suit, and he fought for subtlety, like Al Pacino, they were going to fire him. They were about to fire him about 3 weeks into the shoot. He was so quiet, he was just quiet. And then they saw the scene where he does the assassination, and they were like, oh, that's what he's doing. And teaching, they taught us all about subtleties and giving humanity to every character, even villains and that kind of thing. So just an amazing, and an incredible, empowering story. So really, it's in my room, that poster.
Thank you, Mr. Shyamalan. How about a round of applause for our witness? Thank you all for coming today. We are adjourned.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Because education gap. Hollywood filmmaker to education reformer, the transition is not as unusual as it may sound. Remember Haley Joel Osment in The Sixth Sense? Many of Shyamalan's films are told from the point of view of a child. As he once told an interviewer, quote, "I just always think of stories with little kids at the center because that time in my life was a big time. It represents a kind of innocence and belief and faith. These movies are all about learning to believe in something," unquote. Now, through the foundation he co-founded in 2001 with his wife, Bhavna, this self-described interested amateur in education is working to remove the barriers created by poverty and inequality. His efforts started in Philadelphia and now have shifted to advocating for educational reform throughout the United States. Considering that our guest made 45 amateur films with a Super 8 movie camera before he broke into the professional ranks, we will be interested to watch how his burgeoning off-screen passion develops. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming M.Night Shyamalan.
Thank you very much for having me. That was a gracious introduction there. I was listening to all that kid stuff. That was good. So yeah, it's just forgive me for a second because yesterday I was editing movies and this whole kind of jumping between two lives here. It's hard. Like I was at the end of the day in the editing room and we just had a screening and we were going through all the changes with the editor and they're like, "You got to go to Washington D.C. tomorrow to talk." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta." Then I went home and looked at all my notes and changed into another hat. So if I'm a little sluggish mentally, just forgive me for a second, trying to do different things. Let me just start by saying, celebrity activists they make my stomach cringe. So let's just start there. So you don't automatically get the right to to have advice, give advice on something because you 3 floors instead of 4. It's like animals, right? It was damage control, and the theater had been burnt down. Someone had set fire to it. This was my tour, and this was my city, and I was really, really upset. And I saw a kid when I went into, this is kind of symbolic. It's funny, but it was symbolic. I went into the first school. I walked into this school, this vibrant school, and as soon as I walked in, all the kids came rushing over. Oh my God, are you making a movie? You're making a movie here? Can I be in it? Can I die in your movie? And the teachers came out, and it was like the Pied Piper, and the possibility of a movie being made there was just right on the tip of their tongues, and they were ready, And in this other school, a kid came up, walked up to me, literally looked at me, kind of recognized me and decided that's not possible and kept walking. And very symbolic, right? Because those kids, anything is possible. No warning, filmmaker walks in. Yeah, they're gonna make a movie in our school. That's about everything. I want to be in it, you know? The other kid, I'm standing in front of him, and it's not there. It's just not there. And it's very symbolic of what's been done to these kids. So very, very organically, I said, all right, I just want to know the answers to this. Very simple, I went, let's go, you know, in the typical foundation way, let's go to the place in the United States where they have inner city education correct for low-income kids. They go out, they look, there is none. Fascinating piece of information for me. So then I said, let me just ask questions. So the beauty of being, the one good thing about being, you know, known a little bit is you can call people. You can say, hey, Senator, can I talk to you? Hey, you're the head of this in California or in, you know, Colorado, wherever. Can I fly to you and will you have dinner with me and can I ask you questions? So we started doing that. I just said, hey, I came here and went everywhere. You know, I met with everybody at the time who was in the top places in education. What works? I said, what works? And they would give me their list, A, C, G, you know, X, Y. And then I go to the next person, hey, what works in education? And they'd go A, you know, L, M, C, and I go, wait. And then I kept doing it, and every list was different. Now,
freelance journalist and the Speakers Committee member who organized today's event. Thank you so much, Andrea. Joanna Duffy, program coordinator of the M.Night Shyamalan Foundation. Jill Lawrence, columnist for Creators Syndicate and other news outlets. John Selak, president of the Selak Media Group and editor of the Selak Report. Tejender Singh, editor and White House correspondent for India America Today. M. Night Shyamalan has directed, written, and produced 10 major motion pictures, including one of the top-grossing films of all time, The Sixth Sense. The 1999 thriller starring Bruce Willis was nominated for 6 Academy Awards and grossed more than $2 billion worldwide. A master of the supernatural, Shyamalan is now working on a star-studded mystery series, Wayward Pines, which debuts on Fox this fall. He also has an independent feature film in the works called Sundowning. In Shyamalan's first film, the low-budget Praying with Anger, he played an American visiting India, the place of his birth. In real life, he's the son of 2 doctors and grew up in suburban Philadelphia. That's where he and his family still live and where most of his movies have been filmed and are set. It was in 2007, while visiting high schools in Philadelphia, scouting for locations for the movie The Happening, that Shyamalan first became interested in the issue of education. He wondered why 2 schools, just a few minutes' drive apart, were so different. One filled with eager, excited students and teachers, the other so scary and depressing that it seemed like a prison. That set off a 4-year quest for answers that culminated last fall in the book, I Got Schooled, the unlikely story of how a moonlighting movie maker learned the 5 keys to closing America. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Myron Belkind. I'm an adjunct professor at the George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs in the Graduate School of Political Management. a former international bureau chief for the Associated Press, and the 107th president of the National Press Club. The National Press Club is the world's leading organization, the world's leading professional organization for journalists committed to our profession's future through our programming with events such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at press.org. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker and those of you attending today's event. Our head table includes guests of our speaker, as well as working journalists who are club members. And so if you hear applause in our audience, I note that members of the general public are attending, and that's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answers period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guests. I'd ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is called. From your right, the audience's right, Anthony Schopp, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Social Driver and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Nell Minow, movie critic for BeliefNet. Helen Fresenden, Washington correspondent for the Oregonian in Portland. Jennifer Schonberger, producer for Fox Business News and co-organizer of today's event. Jennifer Walters-Michalek, executive director of the M.Night Shyamalan Foundation. Jerry Zaremski, chairman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, a past NPC president, and the Washington bureau chief for the Buffalo News. Skipping over our guest for a moment, Andrea Stone.
We're successful at something else that makes no sense at all. But you do have a spotlight on you sometimes, and I think that's how it gets blurred. In my case, it's something I'm really sensitive about. So it's not something I've always said, graciously no to being asked to be promoting this or that charity-wise. So this is very unusual for me, and in fact, came really organically. As was mentioned, this kind of began very without me thinking about it, kind of just as a citizen. We went and I live in Philadelphia, and I needed something to be personal. Our foundation does a lot of amazing work around the world, and generally speaking, they'll come and say, we're helping this community in Africa, we're helping this community in India, and I'll be interested, but it's, I'm not the one getting activated, and they are, and my wife is. But on this particular subject, I got hit. And basically, I spent the last 5 years on planes, on evenings and weekends, writing, researching, and working with a team to come to this book, which was really kind of an organic. And I think for me, anything good that's come in my life has come without an agenda. I had no idea where it was going. Just I wanted to learn. So really, I feel like on behalf of the single mom of the inner city child, that I wanted to be the one with the resources to get the information, to give them the information. That's really all it was really about at the end of the day, and still today. So what happened was, I went to this school in The Happening, where Mark Wahlberg was a principal in a school, and we saw these two schools, and it was in Philadelphia. One was this incredibly vibrant school, and then I got in the van to the location scout, went 4 minutes away, and went into another school. And this was the worst thing you could imagine, the usual metal detectors, the lights really dim, the kids were just, not in a good place. And to even show me the classrooms, the janitor had to unlock the classroom doors. There were bars on every classroom, literal bars. And the top floor of this school was shut down because there was too much drug and sex going on, so they just crammed the kids down onto